I think you all know by now that I hate winter. I like these 50-degree winter days. Don't throw stones at me, but I'm a fan of global warming. I mean, I want, I'd be okay. Maybe I just need to move south. But my parents used to tell the story of me that when I was a kid, you know how stay-at-home moms, they need a break from their children. And so in the wintertime, it didn't matter. You still needed a break, so you'd bundle them up and you'd send them outside. Well, she'd bundle us all up, and my brother and sister would run outside, and apparently I would stand at the back door crying, wanting to come back in. I've hated winter my entire life. I was always the first one to be ready to come back in. When I'm plowing or blowing snow in my driveway, I'm thinking of mowing my grass. I look at the yard and I know someday I'll be in shorts again. Someday I'll be in a tank top again and I'll be mowing my grass, and this is just temporary as I blow the snow, and then it all comes back on me, and you get it down my neck and all that kind of miserable stuff. I don't like winter. I believe we have winter because of the fall, because of sin. We know that God created the world and He called it perfect, right? And that was in the Middle East. And it was warm. And there was no snow. I'm convinced that snow is a result of sin. And so it's wrong to we should reject snow. We want to reject sin in our life. We should reject snow. I'm not sure how good that is theologically, but I'm okay with that. That's my theological position, that winter is evil. And I'm okay with that. But I have hope. I look and I look at those trees like, someday there's going to be buds on those trees. Someday, we're going to be ticked off at mosquitoes. I look at the swimming pool and I'm like, oh, someday. There's ice on it now, but someday I'll be able to get back in that pool. I'm always looking forward, and when it's winter, I'm always looking forward to. I'm kind of miserable when it comes into November because I know summer's over and the trees have gone. I hate winter. I hate being cold. I hate snow. But I have hope. I have hope. I think February is the longest month of the year. Anybody else feel that way? It's dark, it's cold, it's snowy, it's just gross. But I have hope because April and flowers and daffodils are coming. Tulips are going to bloom, and pretty soon it's going to be May, and all the trees are. I have hope. But right now it's kind of hard because of life. I think New Year's Day is about hope. New Year's Day, we look at what's ahead, and we kind of look back at the previous year, and we think of the negative things that happened, and some of the good. But we always hope that the next year is going to be better, regardless of what the previous year was like. We look at the next year, and it's filled with hope and anticipation about what can be. What can be. We look at the stories that we just covered through Christmas, and we talked about the shepherds and the hope that they had. They heard this incredible story, and they responded fearlessly to the call and to what the angels had told them. And we talked about the Magi, and we talked about their curiosity, and that led them on a 2-year journey to discover this, what the star meant, and then processed what the star meant after that. And we had Mary and Joseph and Jesus and their fearlessness and their courage and their faith and their love for us. And it was always about something that was next. It wasn't about their moment. It was about the shepherds in the field, and here we are just minding our own business, taking care of the stinking sheep. Boom, their life changes. The Magi doing their thing in Persia, wherever they were living, and all of a sudden they see the stars. Hey, let's check this out. Mary and Joseph looking forward to their wedding, and God interrupts their plans, and they don't know what that really means, but they're willing to go along, and they're open to whatever God has for them, and there is this hope of something greater, something better, something else that even though it wasn't their plan, even though it wasn't in their 5-year plan, even though it wasn't in their life goals, God showed up in this incredible way, and he didn't give him the whole picture. He just gave him a snapshot, and he just told him a little bit. Like, okay. They had hope that it would be better, and they had hope and faith and trust in Jesus that it was going to be okay and that it was going to be good. And then somehow, some way, it was going to be better, even though they didn't have the whole picture, even though they didn't have the whole story. They were kind of in their winter in the midst of this, but they got their eyes off of the snow, they got their eyes off of the cold, and they were looking forward to, like I look forward to spring. They were looking forward to something else that God had for them that wasn't in this moment. It was hard. It was tough. They didn't have the whole picture. They didn't have all the details, but they were looking forward, knowing that if God is telling me this, then somehow it has to be right. It doesn't make sense. But I trust Him, so I will listen. And again, we talk about the shepherds and we talk about the magi, the people who were outcasts, who were the uneducated, at least the shepherds were. The magi who were not Jewish people, that God calls all of us. And it's easy to look across the room here and say, well, I look over there and I see this person, and certainly God can use this person, and certainly He would call this person before He would call me. And it's easy to look and point fingers and say, well, it's not me, it's them. I can't do this. How God calls these people who are willing and available. And He equips the called. He doesn't call the equipped. And so you may not be equipped, but if you're called, He will equip you. And we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know what the future is going to be. We don't know what it's going to hold. We don't know all of the details. But if God has called us, then certainly He will equip us when we need it. I want you to turn to the book of Hebrews chapter 11. Now, a lot of you know where I'm going. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Hebrews chapter 11 we call the faith chapter of the Bible. If you read through the whole chapter, and we're only going to read the first 2 verses. It's all the heroes of our faith. All of our the fathers and mothers that we can look to as men and women and point to and say, well, if they can do it, certainly I can. But Hebrews chapter 1, just the first 2 verses, it says, faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. Now, I'm just going to mention this as just kind of a parenthetical statement, that it was through their faith that they earned a good reputation. That's something that maybe you can hold on to and you can evaluate about what we pursue a good reputation amongst people, amongst family, amongst the church and the nation. It was their faith that earned them that good reputation. But if you look at verses 1 and 2, verse 1 in particular, it's this certainty they had in uncertainty. It's the confidence they had in something that couldn't be proven. I love the expression in the Old Testament where it talks about the people, and in the New Testament when Jesus, in particular Jesus, when He set His face toward Jerusalem. End of His life, disciples knew that if they went back to Jerusalem, He was going to be killed. But He set His face toward Jerusalem. There was a resolution about His appearance. The disciples were scared, but they looked at Jesus, and He was confident. He was certain. There was an assurance in his demeanor and in His face and in His expression, His behavior, everything about it. You know, only 7% of communication is words. Only 7% of communication is the words that we actually use. 93% of our communication is nonverbal. 93%. You wonder why texts get us in trouble? You wonder why debating things on Facebook is pointless? Only 7% of communication actually involves the words that we use. It's tone, it's body language, it's gestures, it's facial expressions, it's everything else. And words don't carry meaning. We attach meanings to words. I would look at the walls and I say, well, that's gray. And somebody said, that ain't gray. That's blue. That ain't blue. Well, that's red. Well, that's not red. You know, we attach meanings to words. Words don't carry meaning. So we get in these conversations, and if I say something is big, well, what does big mean to you? Big to me and big to you are two different things. Nice to me and nice to you are two different things. We have this account of these people who lived their life, and they couldn't explain it. They couldn't really fully understand it. That God had given them a message, and they heard this, and nobody else, it made sense to nobody else. Mom, Dad, Mary said, Mom, Dad, guess what? I'm pregnant, and I'm a virgin. Uh-huh. Joseph, God did a miracle. Uh-huh. Until God revealed it to him. We have this difficulty in our faith. We have this difficulty in our life of how do we explain faith to people who don't have done it, or to people who don't understand it or experience it. And we have a whole chapter list here of people who lived their life in faith that nobody else understood and nobody else could fathom and grasp. They had this certainty, this resolution in their faith and in their life, their face, and when they that people just knew something was different about it. But nobody, including the people, could explain what it is or why it was, other than I just believe God. I just trust that what He said is true. I can't explain it to you. It doesn't make sense. I understand that. But I have this certainty that what He told me was true. Now, we can get confused sometimes. It was probably close to 25 years ago, probably now. I was convinced that God had shown me something, that God made a message to me very clear. So clear that I climbed out of a tree stand. I was hunting. Climbed out of a tree stand to go do this thing. And it didn't happen. I was like, God, what? I don't get it. I was so certain that this is what you wanted. I was so certain that this was right and that this was true. God, what was wrong? What? I don't get it. And I still have that certainty, and I don't understand. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I didn't understand Him clearly enough, but maybe it was just about obedience. Maybe it was just about it wasn't the end product. Maybe it was about my obedience in this moment. And do you trust me enough to obey me even if it doesn't make sense and even if it doesn't come true? Even if it doesn't happen, do you trust me in this moment? And do you still carry that hope with you that not to be disappointed and not to throw your hands up in frustration and say, God, you lied. Or even that I was wrong. I believe it can both be true, that God was right and I was faithful, and it was just about the journey, it was just about the process, it was just about obedience. Because if you look at the story, if you go back to chapter 11, it's not on the screen, so you have your Bibles or your phones. Look at the last couple of verses, verse 39 and 40. All of these people earned a good reputation. That goes back to verse 2. All of these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in mind for us. That's Jesus and the cross that they're referring to. God had something better in mind for us. None of these people that you look through this passage, you look through this chapter, none of these people experienced the fullness of the promise that God gave them. And I look at that and I think, well, I mean, we can look at that a couple different ways, I guess. You know, was God just teasing? Was God wrong? Did God lie? Did God mislead? Did God do something that wasn't right? I don't know. I want to say no. Because it said he had a different plan. They were in their winter, but their eyes were constantly looking forward to, and their faithfulness, their obedience was right and true, even though they didn't fully experience it, because it was about obeying what God had called them to do. They trusted, they walked the journey that God had put them on, regardless of the outcome simply because God led them there. And God asked them to. They were in their winter. You look through the story, and there's Gideon, and there's Abraham, and there's Rahab, and there's all these people in here, and Sarah, and Abraham got this promise. You're going to be a father of great nation. How many children did he ever see? 2. Rahab, there's this promise you're going to be a part, and she never experienced it. We can get so caught up in the end result that we forget that faithfulness is about obedience on a daily basis, and that the results are up to God. I'm going to have hope, and I'm going to choose hope, and I'm going to look to the future. Maybe what I'm going through is not for me. Maybe it's for the faith of somebody else. Maybe somebody else gets to experience the blessing of my faithfulness. Maybe I don't ever get to, and I have to be okay with that. I've told you the story multiple times about us being homeless and unemployed on a couple different occasions, and how difficult that was, and still not fully understanding all of it, although we've gotten to see a glimpse that if we hadn't have done that, we wouldn't have never been to this church or then to that church, and then if we hadn't have gone through that. Am I okay with that? I have to be. It's also about the faith of my children and my grandchildren, and how that experience impacted them. And am I okay with that? I have to be, and yes, I am. And if I'm willing, if I can go through something and never experience the fullness of a promise, never experience what I expect or what I anticipate to be the greatness and the goodness of God, then why would you ask me to do this? And I don't know, I don't understand, but I have hope and belief and faith that, God, you're still good, and that I can trust you. And that you work all things together for good for those who trust you. And so, God, I'm going to trust you. I may not experience it. There's a whole chapter full of people that we would call the heroes of our faith that never experienced the fullness of the promise of God. Are we okay with that? In your life, what are you going through? What are you struggling with? What are you experiencing? What do you say, God, why? Why am I going through this? God, I don't understand. God, I'm fully convinced that you asked me to do this. Yet I haven't seen the deliverance. I haven't seen the answers to my promise. I haven't experienced all of the blessings that you said are going to come. God, why? There's hope. In the winter, it's hard to see and remember the warmth of the sun of June and July. February can seem so long. And then we get to March, and we get excited about March, and then March disappoints. March is just about as bad as February. And January, at least you expect it. January is just a miserable month. I mean, it's just going to be cold. And I can accept that. It's going to be cold. February, that hope starts to creep in. Oh, and then it just disappoints. March is tough. Because March, you think, okay, now the flowers start coming, the birds start returning. March is spring, right? And then March just sucks the life out of you too. It's just one of those things like, then life can do that to us, can it? That we can think and we can feel, I'm at the end. The struggle is almost over, and then we get smacked again. It's like, God, when is it going to be over? When is it going to end? God, when am I going to experience the promise that you gave of deliverance, of overcoming? God, you said we are overcomers, and I don't feel it. I'm not seeing it. Do you have hope? Do you have hope for a better future? Hope that God will not disappoint, and I don't know when, and I don't know how, but I know that God is faithful, and I am going to cling to that truth and that reality. then I am certain, Hebrews 11:1 we just read, I am certain and I have absolute and total confidence in an uncertainty. I have absolute total confidence and faith, and I'm going to stake my life on this that I can't prove or explain to anybody else, that makes no sense to anyone. But I'm going to give my life to it, regardless of what happens. I'm going to keep my eyes off of the snow. I'm going to keep my eyes off of the cold. I'm going to keep my eyes off of what's going on. Or I'm going to keep my eyes off of my current reality, and I'm going to look forward to the future where I know God is reigning, and God, He's still reigning now, that God's going to deliver, and I don't know when that's going to be, and it may not be in my lifetime. Boy, are you okay with that? It may not be in your lifetime. You may not experience what you know God has given to you or promised you. Are you okay? And will you still maintain your faith and your absolute certainty of the goodness of God, even though you don't experience the deliverance, even though you don't experience the blessing, even though you may not experience the fullness of what He's offered? These heroes of our faith did. They maintained their faith even though all these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. It says all. It doesn't say they didn't experience some of the promise. They didn't experience some of His grace, enough, a sufficiency to keep moving, to keep going, to keep plodding, to keep struggling, to keep our eyes up. And I'm going to look and I'm going to see up there. I know God is going to come through, and I have hope in the future. I have hope in what God is going to do, and so I'm going to choose to look to Him. I'm going to choose to get my eyes off the problem. Remember what Peter in the water, walking on the water, accomplishing great things. It's not biblical. But I have this image of Peter walking across the water and kind of looking back at the boat and kind of winking at the guys. Like, that's right, I'm doing this. You guys aren't. You guys are still back in the boat. I'm walking on water. Do the Fonz. Hey. I just dated myself. And then boom, reality hits and he sinks and he falls and he's a wet dog. Humbled. That can happen to us too. Do we keep our faith and keep our eyes on Christ, regardless of what happens, regardless of the circumstances around us? Do we keep our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our? I love that He perfects. It's not a one time. It's not a moment. It's not in a moment. It's a process, and it's a lifetime where He gives us what we need as we need it, when we need it, and we hold on to these things. You know, it's like winter. I keep going back to that. I mean, you got to understand what winter does to me and why I need to look. You know, I look at the trees and the leaves fall off, and those you can see the beginnings of the bud that are sitting there waiting, dormant. I don't know if you've ever noticed that before. I've had to notice that because it gives me hope that tree is still alive. That tree is still alive. Part of my hope that I get is I know, so we're in January, right? So I know that next month I'm going to start tapping trees. And you're like, well, that's dumb. I love maple syrup, and I enjoy making maple syrup. And I know that in February I get to tap trees. So as miserable as February is, there's an excitement, there's a hope that I have that I get to start tapping trees. In March, I get to start boiling sap. There's those pieces that God gives us along the way that we may not get to fully experience the promise. We may not get to fully experience all of the hope that He has, but He gives us these things along the way. And that's true of all of our stories. It's true of your story. It may be health. It may be finances. It may be relationships. I don't know what you're going through. But I can promise you that there is hope in your story, that there's hope in your journey, that there's hope for a future. You may not fully experience it, but I can promise you and guarantee you that God is still faithful. He's still faithful. I have For my winter, I have the tree buds and I have maple syrup. And what do you have in your story? What are you holding on to? What are you clinging to that I look back at our story and look at the moments. It seems so long when we were struggling. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a very short part of that. Like, okay, let's keep things in perspective. Let's keep our struggles in perspective. Let's keep our hurts and our pains in perspective. We need to prioritize who Christ is. We need to prioritize our relationship to Him and keep it in perspective of who He is and what He's doing and what He's trying to accomplish in the grand scheme of things. We have hope today, folks. We have hope. Again, something else I annoy Becky with is I look at our retirement account. Retirement account's down $20,000. You know that in 3 years, the market has never stayed down over 3 years. It always comes back up in the history of the stock market. Like, okay, there's hope. Relax, as if this is your money anyway, Michael. It's not yours, it's mine. And through that, God has been reminding me, who are you trusting in, Michael? Is it the stock market? Or is it me to provide? Okay. Yeah. It's you, Jesus. It's you. Okay, who are you trusting in for your health? Is it doctors or is it me? We just had mother-in-law's funeral this week. Never known her to not be racked with pain. Hips, knees, back, arthritis. Had hope of restoration. It was an encouragement to me with health issues that I have. Okay, someday I'll be whole. Someday I'll be restored. This is momentary. This is a season. Maybe a season that lasts the rest of my life. Am I okay with that? Yeah, because God has given me something that we all have our burdens to bear. We have those struggles. Is it for me or is it for somebody else? Am I okay with the struggles I have being for somebody else? Or in my struggles, seeing and experiencing God's grace? How about you? Do you have hope? Do you have hope in your struggles? Do you have hope in your uncertainty? Do you have hope in your fear? Are you standing on something that's solid and true and immovable, even though it doesn't make sense to anybody else, maybe even to yourself? God is good all the time. And His story that we have just come through proves that. That He calls those who didn't think they were worthy, who didn't think they were qualified. Those are the ones He chose this special revelation to give. The same thing is true for us. We have hope. We have hope, friends. We have hope in a future, and God is good. And I can't promise you if you will ever see and experience the fullness of His promises. But I can promise you He's still good. I can promise you there's still hope. We're going to close and we're going to sing. Maybe you need to take some paper out. Maybe you just need to take some notes and to write some thoughts down. Maybe God is showing you, the Holy Spirit's revealing some things to you about, I think if we stop and if we look and we examine situations that we can say are hopeless, I think if we stop and we allow the Spirit to speak to us, I am 100% certain that we can start to see and be able to identify the good things and the grace of God working in our story. So maybe you need to do that as we close with a song. That you just need to sit there and say, thank you. Thank you for my struggles. Thank you for my hardships. God, I see you working. I see you moving. And even if I don't, God, I'm still going to choose hope. I'm still going to choose to believe that you have what's right and what's best. Let's stand and let's sing this together.
Amen. Well, in closing,